The last session is we're just going to continue the discussion we've been having on the mites, how to treat them, and then we can, if we want to, we can move into these questions that are on your program, such as, more about genetics, pitfalls of natural beekeeping, local queen production, integrated best management, and so forth. So we're going to kind of open it up. Mark, if we come back up here, we're going to keep the panel members up here because they seem to be expert, at least in mites, mite control, and I think other things too, because there's some more experience. And of course, we have PJ and other people up here that can also, I think, help us out, many others of you in the audience. So, Dr. B. So, let's just continue to march. Finish, wrap this one up as necessary, and wrap it up.
So here's a question. How much more do you want to beat the horse, the dead horse, of treatment?
I want to be a dead mite.
Okay, that's good. That means that some of the things that we said took hold. Yeah?
Okay, so can we kind of go back to the beginning again? So, we didn't actually say, you said personally what your thresholds kind of used to be. We didn't actually say, and when Island Froa here about 2 years ago when Bee Informed Partnership came, they gave us a threshold for spring and then another threshold for fall.
Right.
So could we address that? What actual numbers would have cued everybody in to want to make a treatment decision?
I have always been real careful about the spring-fall dichotomy because there's different ways of interpreting it. Some people say the spring one because you're being followed by a period of brood and expansion of bees, and the varroa population should be lower, and the fall one can be higher as a threshold. But here's a caveat. What happens after the fall? Winter, which is a really critical time in terms of having healthy workers. And because that last crop of brood production is basically your winter bees, which are going to have to survive, depending on where you are, for 3-4 months, and they need to be extremely healthy. So I would say, I try to simplify things, and I would say, just for simplicity and consistency, let's use fairly similar thresholds for the time of year uniformly. But I know there's people that work a lot on that, and it's all over the place, it's so local and so variable that I try to stay away from it. Somebody asked me whether I knew anything about the effectiveness. I think it's called the Dowder method that you were mentioning, of putting powdered sugar over the whole colony. And Craig was, I'm making it drop. Do you have any idea of how effective it is? Let's say you're at 10% infestation, you do that, and then measure afterwards, what would you get?
I don't have any solid data on there. As far as the mite drops, it's actually fairly high in there. I need to do better following that, like you said, after the fact, see how the treatment is doing, not just assume, because I've seen a bunch of mites on there.
But let's do some math, just for the heck of it. Let's say you have a colony that has 20,000 workers. Okay, let's say it's a 10% infestation. So that's how many mites? 1,000 mites, right? Let's say the effective 2,000 mites. So 2,000 mites, right? Let's say you have a 50% drop. 1,000 mites falling down would be pretty dramatic looking, right? But still, it's only 50. You have 1,000 still there.
Not to mention there's probably still 50% more sitting in the brood that you haven't even touched yet. That's what I've heard about sugar shakers, you have to do it.
Right.
Like,
So it's repeated.
yeah.
So let me ask you this, do you treat ever?
I'm in this
He's not gonna tell us.
No. It's a very straight answer, but it has a preface to it. I'm in this kind of unusual situation that I know people that are breeding bees that I can trust and I can get them. So, and I'm also not living off my bees. But I don't want to brag because it's a very unusual situation, but I haven't put a chemical in my colonies in easily 50 years.
What are you doing?
Getting queens that I know are highly resistant and monitoring for mites. And if something starts getting out of hand, I will try and eliminate that queen and turn over so that I have resistant queens back into that colony. So it's like a round-robin system that it's open to bringing in new material. It tests in a hive environment, and anything that is not working, the queen is out.
Are you doing any of the non-chemical methods?
0.
So how often do you test?
Spring and fall. So, again, don't do this at home because first of all, I think it's very hard to get highly resistant queens. Truly. Queens that in our research 8 years, when you start with a known amount of mites, they go down in infestation. They're just not that common. And it's frustrating as can be for me, but it just has not happened.
Have you lost a lot of eyes?
I hardly lose hives.
So $250 to $700 per queen.
Well, that's, no, I have paid them for this because it's true, but those are just a soft part of what I have. And right now, I mean, I have to be honest, I don't have that many colonies. The name of my operation sounds very, very daunting and great, but I just have, like right now, I'm running a half dozen colonies very carefully from non-genetic origin, monitoring mites, and doing this little round robin, and letting the thing kind of expand in a sustainable way. I can probably buy, 50 packages, get queens from everywhere, and do sort of a dramatic expansion that way and get started.
Amy has a question.
Yeah.
Oh, I almost forgot what I was gonna ask.
I know.
I'm like, thanks, John. Gosh, I really don't remember.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was gonna comment though. I like what you said this morning about when you buy the ESH queen, you're buying the queen and the treatment in one. I think that's a really good thing to consider. I like how you
That's
said
good
that.
propaganda, but
Yeah.
there's a good market for it. I mean, there is a market, but there's no supply. The supply is really limited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is the VHS, is that a dominant or recessive gene?
It's neither. It's polygenic from what we know. Although you'll find some researchers that have tried to fit it into the dominant recessive, and they talk about 2 genes possibly being involved. But all of that, to me, is highly speculative. Bee genetics is like in its infancy. They sequence the bee genome with a lot of fanfare and funding, and oh my God, it's the first insect that got sequenced. But that doesn't mean anything. That just means that we know the order of the nucleotides, but we don't know what is coding for what, which is called annotation. And there's very few genes that have been annotated and sort of done rigorously as saying, okay, it's in chromosome so-and-so, it's this sequence, and it governs this gene product.
That's that question.
Yeah?
Beth.
Oh, Beth.
So after you get your VHSH queens and they're doing good and your mite counts are low, do you ever let those colonies raise queens and then see if you can sustain that? quality with them?
Well, I'm at the beginning of that point, but that is what you should be doing. You get a bigger VSH queen, and rather than say, okay, this is my only production colony, you start raising daughters from that, and then by grafting.
Right.
And then after that, whether you control the drone side or not, is another big question.
But that'd be worth a try, right?
It's been tried before and it works, but it's not easy. Because it requires, you have to know queen production, you have to have a system where the matings are controlled with the right kind of drones, which either involves some kind of isolation or using instrumental insemination. And it's not for everybody. So even though I'm saying this is the pathway and this is the way we should be looking, it also is not a very, very nice super highway where everything is defined and the road marks are marked. It's full of potholes that you have to navigate.
One bad drone is all.
Not necessarily, but yeah,
Can change.
things can change, right?
And if they're polygenic, if that gene is, then there's still no guarantee the daughters are being born to.
Repeat the question.
If they're polygenic, there's no guarantee that the daughters are going to perform well. There's been tests done by John Harbaugh and Jeff Harris where they looked at sort of this application where you get a high VSH queen, you let it free mate with whatever, and then you measure how it does with varroa. It does intermediate between a highly susceptible, between the pure parent, and it's right there in the middle. Now that middle can be pretty useful because it can keep mite levels fairly low or delay a treatment. And there's variability,
Yes.
yeah, which is something that the commercial guys cannot deal with. They love that chemical application that provides a reliable outcome and it's uniform. With a genetic system like this, we will have some colonies that are super good where the mites drop. You may have some colonies where the mites stay stable. You may have a few colonies where it increases.
Okay, a quick question on that. I just read a study recently, this just came out, I can't remember who did it, that when the workers raise their own queen, that they prefer a specific rare gene, like it's not any egg. So when we're out there just grafting,
Right.
we're picking them.
Right.
Are we hurting it versus they know something we shouldn't?
This study opens sort of a big can of worms for geneticists and bees because it not only does it show that bees choose some loyal patrolines to rear their queens from, but also it confirms that the number of matings. Okay, here's a question for the audience. How many drones does a queen on average mate with?
25. 15.
You said she read the study. It's 50. On average in these colonies, 50. That's staggering. That's a lot of drones and it kind of changes our perspective. So here's I mean, you can think of many consequences of this finding. There's a lot of talk about how inbred the U.S. population is, how in honeybees. and how bottlenecked it is, and whether it's sort of a Bible thing, how much importations we need. And a lot of times the discussions are based on, okay, so many queens got brought into the Americas at such a time. And it gives you this impression that it's only one individual. But as Amy was saying, it's not just the queen that is represented in that introduction or in that unit that you're going to propagate. It's the queen and all the drones that are represented in the spermatheca. Good. Hey, let me ask you guys a question because I'm curious and I hold sort of a personal responsibility towards this phenomenon. Why are people using top bar hives? Oh, now I'm asking questions back to the audience.
Ease,
Huh?
for ease.
Okay.
For fresh comb.
Fresh comb, okay.
Don't have to bend over and do near as much lifting.
Okay.
Still gotta work just as hard though.
Any other reasons?
It's less expensive
Less expensive? Okay.
on the poor countries for bee propagation,
Right.
production.
Right.
There's more of a community here where, like the person who got me into beekeeping, they had top bars, so I wanted what I could interchange with them, and that's where, you know,
Okay.
TJ's hive design here is so popular because you can interact top bars with, you know, whoever your mentor is and whoever you're starting.
Okay.
I think one big part of that is I really like to keep them is the fact there's so many chemicals in the air, and now we're putting chemicals in the hive.
Right.
It's just the nature of destroying the comb. You tend to have newer combs, so in lanes you have, if you don't pay attention, you can have a 5-year-old comb. Those are saying, and I think that promotes a little bit more of a healthy environment.
Yeah.
I think when you're doing an inspection, you take a window on the top bar, right, you work your way this way, whereas with a leg, you pull the whole thing apart.
Okay. I think all of those comments are valid, TJ.
We've done a number of tests from time to time with our bee yard, the one we were at.
Yeah.
Historically, top bars have been healthy. Now, there's no reason to say we know why that is, but what's happening?
The bees build a more organic shape.
And the comb? That the bees build up more organic shape to the comb.
What's organic though? Meaning? That they design the comb is more, it's not rigid to the comb in the frame.
It's sort of a more natural
Because the ones that I pulled out of the wall, pulled out of the wall, they're just straight and all the way
If you
down
put
the
them in a
bottom.
basket, they shake it like
Yeah.
a basket.
Okay. A few more responses to the question of top bar hives.
They choose the size of the cell.
Yeah.
Okay.
Make your own cell size.
Okay. I'm trying to be a good listener. Because I have fairly strong opinions about it, but I can explain it in a minute.
Why are you asking the question?
Good point, because I'm a little bit startled at how much the use of top bar hives has taken off in some areas in the U.S. So I think your question leads me to an explanation that I've been meaning to give regarding my responsibility in some of the development of the top bar hive. And I'll try and keep this sort of brief and just to the point. In the 70s, late 70s, I went to the University of Guelph in Canada, and the professors there that taught beekeeping were involved in some beekeeping development programs in Africa. And one of the technologies that they were advocating for beekeeping in Africa was top bar hives. And they had done some background research through the years. And yes, all those things that some of you mentioned, lower initial cost, ease of management under some conditions, particularly highly defensive African bees, having, as you say, just a small window that you open and control the smoke was helpful. Africa also at that time was a net exporter of wax. So the turnover of wax that you have with top bar hives was considered a good thing. And to put me back into the picture a little bit, when I finished my degree there, another guy from Colombia and I went to Kenya to kind of look at their development program with African bees. Why? Because Africanized bees were about to enter Colombia, and there was an idea that some of the technologies from Africa could be used in this kind of situation. And we went back to Colombia and advocated that in some situations, like subsistence farmers that were diversifying and wanted to keep bees. It was using a hive, like the top bar hive was an appropriate technology. So take me back to the, early 80s. In my dad's wood workshop, I was cutting boards and top bars and trying to see how applicable it was. It worked, it was a situation. And then I got back into research and never touched a top bar hive. And now I come back to some areas of the States and people are using top bar hives. And I say, okay, is this an appropriate technology for where the US is at this point? And personally, I would argue first, we have access to fairly well manufactured and not very expensive for what we can afford in Langstroth. Langstroths, I think, give you more management flexibility. You could argue that there's a few characteristics of top bars that are more versatile and easy to manage. But personally, I prefer to manage stuff in Langstroth. It gives me more versatility. And but that doesn't mean that I don't work with people that have top bars. There's actually a person in Crestone that bought some top bars, and we have tried to mentor her, and I kind of kid her about it, but she's okay with it. And basically what we have tried to do with her 4 colonies is emphasize varroa management, and we help her monitor and not lose colonies through the winter, and it has worked. So that part I have no problem with. But I do have an issue, and I would like, if there were data, see whether a top bar hive promotes bee health or specifically resistance to varroa over a Langstroth hive. There's no research that I have seen. There may be some anecdotes, but unless you monitor mice, you really don't know. Enough of a speech. How are we on time? Another question? Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of, let's take you up on that, since there's so many people in here with top bars. How do we collect that data in a way that is?
I think it would be very easy. In its simplest form, you have a standardized source of bees. Let's say you bring them in as packages, you put them in Langstroth and top bar hives, same bees, same source, and then as consistently as you can, manage them to give them a chance to grow, and you measure health factors, the big one being varroa. That would be what would convince me that there could be a difference.
So how many people, 100 people?
No. A good number for what? Number of experimental units for beekeeping is something in the order of what John is doing with his Russian and BSH. It's like 10, 10, 10, 10, 15, 15, 15, 15, do 2 yards, just so that you can deal with some of the, incorporate some of the variability from the environment. But frankly, the only thing that I would see that a top bar hive would do in terms of keeping varroa levels lower is something having to do with what Tom Seeley has found in his natural cavities in the Arno forest, that they're smaller, and when the brood nest is confined, there's less factory for varroa production, and if they swarm, they tend to drop the microbes. But to me, that's kind of a weak mechanism of differences. If it's not based on some genetic difference or some, structural difference that has nothing to do with the volume, in other words, if the volumes are the same, then you're really not convincing. Yeah, correct.
What do you think about different cell sizes?
advocated as a way to keep varroa levels down. The only experiments that I have seen, I think, were done by Jamie Ellis and possibly by Jennifer Berry. And short term, it didn't show any effect of the small cell. Now people say there's this kind of required conversion of the bees through time into smaller bees that is also important. But scientifically, that is kind of a hard thing to measure because then you have sort of this moving target where you say, well, we did it at 1 year, and then people can say, well, 1 year is not enough. You have to go to 2. And it's sort of a slippery slope as far as I'm concerned.
Is that there are articles where they said with smaller cell structure, you have more bees, therefore, towards the end of the year, you have a very good possibility of having
So it's actually
because
the opposite.
the host factor.
So it's actually the opposite.
Right, and I've seen arguments both ways, so that's why I was asking.
Yeah, that's one topic that I tried at another meeting, and it didn't go very well. But I basically asked the audience, where are you getting your information from? Because we are in the information age, and there's this continuum of ways of getting information that ranges from very convincing YouTube with guys that sound very, and gals that sound very authoritative, but then you sort of look at what is behind it and there's nothing. There's a lot of literature, like books on beekeeping that are coming out. Almost every expert is writing their own book. But to me, and I challenge the audience, and this is perhaps a good opportunity to mention this, to me, I'm trained in doing it, but I really see no reason why the average citizen could not look more carefully into the primary literature. And by that I mean the peer-reviewed articles that are produced by scientists, because it sounds kind of scary when you look at it, but a lot of the studies that are not molecular or highly technical in terms of chemistry, I think are fairly understandable if you take the time and you're not scared by some of the language. Because actually the author kind of gives away their punchline in a very short abstract that is at the beginning of the article, and a lot of those are available. But I always distrust the authors, and I try to go to their actual data as closely as I can, which are either the tables or the figures, because that is, in essence, what they found. Beyond that, there could be span on interpretation, and it can get lengthy, but sometimes a good figure just gives away everything, if you want to try that. And in this information age, a lot of those publications are much more available to the general public than before, where you have to, go to a scientific library and get it. So that's just kind of a challenge to you. So for example, a question on whether small cell works or not, I would say you can find that article by Jamie Ellis or by Jennifer Berry. Just kind of go into it and see whether you can glean anything understandable, because it's really not that complicated. We try to or scientists try to sort of discriminate from the general public a lot, and I don't think there's that much of a gap for those of you that have sort of worked in different fields. It's just one discipline and one approach, and it's not that complicated. You have something?
Yeah, I was looking up your articles, and there's this block. I mean, you have to pay then to the publication, and this happens over and over again. You can read the abstract, but then you can't go on.
Right.
You have to be a subscriber, and the scientific journals are like $200.
Very expensive. Yeah.
So
I'm not saying it's super accessible, but it's more accessible than it used to be. So here's an easy
way to cheat. cheap.
way too cheap, but it's not cheating. For a lot of the articles that I'm talking about and that came out of the USDA lab in Baton Rouge, if you go to their webpage and there's a little banner that has a number of topics, and if you go to publications, there's a PDF of every article that lab has produced since the 1970s. And it's not blocked. You can look at it, read it. I even recently, for my PowerPoint tonight, clipped out a little figure, no problem. But that's just a limited amount of, and I'm not sure what that does to copyright, but there is this ownership clause in the federal system that any kind of information produced by the federal system is not copyrightable and is available to the general public.
Yeah, we pay for it, it's ours.
But definitely journals are really expensive, so that's not a route. Sometimes knowing somebody that has free access, and that is not a violation of copyright if you're sharing it for scientific and review purposes, you can get access to those data.
I have like an answer or a reply to that. If you're a member of the public, you can pay for a library card through UNM and then access the journals that way.
Right.
But I think it might be $30, but I could be way wrong on that. But JSTOR, if you make a profile on JSTOR, you're allowed 3 scholarly articles for free at a time. So whatever that is you were reading about, bees or something else, you're allowed 3 free, complete, not just the abstract, but you can download 3 articles at a time.
I'm hoping that that's a trend that is opening up. You know, there's no reason why a scholarly journal should charge you $200 a year for a subscription. I mean, the system is paid for in different ways. For example, PLOS, Public Library of Science, produces a lot of good papers, interesting stuff, and that one you can just go to the website and type in honeybees and a whole bunch of papers come
The
up.
state library here in New Mexico gives you access to scientific journals, almost unlimited, that you can read. all
So
the
you would
papers.
have to go to their website
Their
and search.
website and start there and go down.
I have a question back here.
Yeah?
I have a question for the panel here.
Okay.
Has anybody ever tried to fog the mites and check to see what their count is? And does it work? Fogging.
So I've done the mineral fog on it, but I have not done the mic count afterwards. So
What is your opinion?
I've heard it works well, but again, I haven't validated it yet. So I know some people have done that and done mic checks.
So that's fogging with what, a salad?
Mineral oil
Mineral.
and with essential oils as far as wintergreen or spearmint.
We tried it, and we also just made the cotton cord. We mixed a solution of the mineral oil, beeswax, honey, and thymol. And we put it in an S curve on top of the root. We tested before, but we haven't had it on, the cord's on long enough. After we put the cords on though, we did fog quickly. So we'll let you know.
So you threw the kitchen sink at it.
So you don't know which one's gonna work, that's
We
correct.
had a 21, we got
So speak up, John.
fogger. That's twice.
Speak up, what?
I said, we have to do the fogger. We had a high mic count, big time. We started doing it, we got to clear down to 7, we got 2 and a 1 right now. Today was the day we were supposed to test it again. I test every week. And I live in the Berlin area, and it's pretty tough down in that part.
So what was your
Yeah.
beginning number?
21.
How much? 21?
21.
How much was your beginning number?
Well, the one that I got for the, let's see. Oh, I can't even remember. I had so many of them I got. And that last one I got from you, that was 28 or 29, and I've got it down to 0 right now.
Using fogging? Huh.
That's fogging. I mean, we're just trying things out to see if it works. We still use the sugar all the time, you know, to double check everything. You know, I lost a lot last year. I lost about 10 hives last year over it.
We're being given 2 minutes. I'm starting a competition for a burning question.
It's on the sheet where IPM fits and does not fit in.
Okay, very briefly, integrated pest management is a technique that was started by entomologists in the past when all these chemicals started failing. And the idea is you integrate a lot of technologies that are non-chemical as far as possible, but possibly chemical. But the main idea is that you measure your pest population to make a treatment decision. Okay? So all those things fall into what we have been talking about, but there are a few differences. First of all, the size of the beekeeping industry and the variability of situations and the amount of money in it has not allowed the development of a lot of very precise guidelines. So for example, in a lot of the crops, you know, corn, soybean, alfalfa in the Midwest, farmers don't make their own decisions. There are these guys called ag consultants that farm out to the farmers, and these guys have a much closer association with research and have a lot of information on what their thresholds are. So they can give much more precise IPM guidelines than what we gave you here. So that doesn't fit. Usually in crops, it's a time decision, let's say at a certain point in the growth period, where they know that if pest species A is at this level, it will or will not affect the crop. So that's a one-time decision that you have to make. You either make it right and you treat it or don't, and you're done. With mites, you have, as he said, sort of a varying situation in terms of infestation, colony growth, risk that changes through time, changes in different places. So that doesn't fit. So that's kind of my general comment on that.
That's good.
Yeah. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funded by ag companies which are promoting their sales. But still, it is based on some kind of guideline that you can investigate what it is or ask the crop consultant. Okay. Not defending the chemical industry, just telling you what I know.
Okay, and wrapping up, I would like to again thank the chairman and I'd also like to thank each of you for coming, your attentiveness, and also your good questions. That really makes for a more dynamic discussion. The third thing I forgot to, I want to say, and I forgot to mention earlier, this is an advertisement, sorry, but Starbucks Coffee did donate the coffee today, so just so you know. I'm going to ask Craig to adjourn anyway. Did you have adjournance? Did you have another?
So, someone, remember, handed this to me, but Jody, one of our own beekeepers, is going to be talking here in a couple of weeks. They have some advertisement paperwork and stuff, but she'll be talking here about bees. It says, home hive beekeeping basics. She'll be talking here in a couple of weeks. So.
And if you have a library card for Bernalillo County or Albuquerque, the seed library is right across the hall. You can get 15 free packets, non-GMO, mostly organic, wildflowers, veggies, other things. So go get your free seed.
Thank you so much.